I became a widow on a quiet Tuesday morning, and by Friday night, my own daughter looked me in the eye across the dinner table and said, "Either you work, or you're out on the street." I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just placed my fork down beside my untouched plate, folded my napkin carefully, and stood up as if she had just asked me to pass the salt. The dining room felt smaller than it had ever been, even though it was the same room I had hosted Thanksgiving dinners in for over 30 years. The chandelier above us cast a soft yellow light, the kind that used to make everything feel warm, safe, like home. That night, it felt cold. My husband's chair sat empty at the head of the table, exactly where it had been since the day we brought it home from a furniture store off Route 9 back in 1987. I glanced at it for just a second, expecting, out of habit more than hope, to see him there, leaning back, smiling gently, telling Ashley to watch her tone. But there was only silence. Ashley didn't look away from me. She held her wine glass in one hand, her posture straight, her expression calm in a way that felt rehearsed. Brian sat beside her, staring down at his plate like he suddenly found mashed potatoes fascinating. No one rushed to take back the words. No one softened them. The air didn't shift. It settled. "You heard me, Mom," Ashley added after a moment, her voice lighter now, almost casual, like she was discussing a grocery list. "You can't just stay here doing nothing anymore. This isn't sustainable." I nodded once, slowly, as if I were processing something reasonable, something practical. Inside, something had already gone quiet. Not broken, not shattered, just quiet. I picked up my purse from the chair beside me, the same leather bag my husband had bought me for our 40th anniversary. It still smelled faintly of his cologne if I got close enough. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't ask where I was supposed to go. I didn't remind her that this house had once been mine, that every wall held a piece of my life, that every corner had been built with years of work, sacrifice, and love. I simply walked out. The night air was cooler than I expected. Early. Fall in Connecticut always had that bite to it once the sun went down, sharp enough to wake you up, gentle enough to pretend it wasn't trying to. I stood on the front porch for a moment, my hand resting on the railing my husband had painted himself just 2 summers ago. The paint was still smooth under my fingers. I wondered briefly if they would repaint it. I wondered if they would change the color. Then I let go. The driveway looked longer than usual as I walked toward my car. Each step felt measured, steady, like I had somewhere to be, even though I didn't. I placed my bag in the passenger seat, closed the door, and paused before getting in. The house behind me was lit up, warm and inviting from the outside, like nothing had changed. Like a family was still inside, finishing dinner, laughing, planning the weekend. From the street, no one would have guessed that a woman had just been told she didn't belong there anymore. I slid into the driver's seat and closed the door quietly. For a moment, I just sat there, my hands resting on the steering wheel, my reflection faint in the dark windshield. 72 years old. That's what I saw. Silver hair pulled back neatly. Blue eyes that had seen more than they ever let on. A face that had spent decades learning how to stay calm, even when everything underneath it shifted. I didn't start the engine right away. Instead, I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. There were no messages, no missed calls, no one asking if I was okay. I placed it back inside without hesitation. Then I started the car. The engine hummed to life, steady and familiar. As I backed out of the driveway, I caught one last glimpse of the house in my rearview mirror. For a second, I imagined the front door opening. I imagined Ashley stepping out, calling after me, saying she didn't mean it, that it was stress, that it was grief talking. The door stayed closed. I drove away. The streetlights blurred past as I turned onto the main road, their glow stretching across the windshield like long, thin lines of gold. My hands were steady on the wheel. My breathing was even. If anyone had seen me, they would have thought I was just another woman heading home after dinner. They wouldn't have known that I had just lost something that couldn't be replaced. Not a house, not a room, something else, something quieter, something deeper. I didn't know exactly where I was going yet, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty as the road stretched out in front of me and the house disappeared behind me completely. Tomorrow morning, I was going to the bank, and that was the moment everything would begin to change. I did not drive far that night, just far enough to put distance between myself and the version of home I could no longer return to. I ended up in the parking lot of a 24-hour grocery store off the highway, The kind with bright fluorescent lights that make everything look a little too clean, a little too exposed. I turned off the engine but left the keys in the ignition, my hands still resting on the steering wheel, as if I had forgotten what came next. Cars came and went around me. People pushing carts, loading bags, living ordinary lives that did not involve being told they were no longer wanted. I sat there for a long time, watching without really seeing. Eventually, I reached for my phone again, not because I expected anything new, but because it gave my hands something to do. Still nothing. No apology. No message asking where I had gone. No concern. I placed it back into my purse and leaned my head against the seat. The silence inside the car felt different from the silence in the house. This one was honest. There was no pretending here, no polite conversation layered over something colder underneath. Just quiet. I closed my eyes for a moment, and without meaning to, my mind drifted back to the kitchen just a week earlier. The morning after the funeral. The house had been full of people then, voices low, movements careful, as if everyone was afraid of breaking something fragile that had already been broken. Ashley had stood at the counter pouring coffee, her back to me. She did not turn when I entered the room. "There is a lot to figure out," she had said, her tone flat, practical. "Bills, the house, everything." I had nodded, thinking she meant we would figure it out together. That had been my mistake. I opened my eyes and looked around the parking lot again. A couple walked past my car, laughing softly about something I could not hear. For a brief second, I felt like I was watching a life I used to recognize. Then the moment passed. I straightened in my seat and checked the time. It was just after 10:30. Too late to call anyone. Not that I was sure who I would call. Most of the people I used to talk to were friends I had made through my husband, couples we had known for years. Since he passed, the phone had been quieter. Not silent, but different. People did not know what to say, so they said less. I started the engine again, the sound grounding me, giving me something solid to hold on to. There was a small motel about 15 minutes away, nothing special, just a place travelers used when they needed a bed for the night. I had passed it dozens of times over the years without ever thinking I would need it. Tonight, it was exactly what I needed. The front desk clerk did not ask questions. He slid a registration card across the counter, his expression neutral, professional. I filled it out carefully, my handwriting steady, each letter placed exactly where it belonged. Name: Margaret Collins. Address. I hesitated for half a second, then wrote it anyway. The same house I had just left. Some habits do not change in a single evening. The room was on the second floor, overlooking the parking lot. It smelled faintly of cleaning solution and something older underneath, like the memory of other people who had passed through. I set my bag down on the small table near the window and walked over to the bed. The sheets were crisp, tucked tightly, untouched. I sat on the edge, my hands resting in my lap, and for the first time that night, I allowed myself to feel the weight of it. Not the anger, not the betrayal, just the weight. 72 years of life does not disappear in a single sentence, but it can shift. It can move under your feet in a way that makes everything feel unfamiliar. I lay back slowly, staring at the ceiling, tracing the faint cracks in the paint with my eyes. My husband used to fix things like that without being asked. He would notice the smallest detail, the things no one else saw, and quietly take care of them. I wondered what he would have said if he had been at that table tonight. I wondered if Ashley would have spoken the same way with him sitting there. The answer came easily. No. I turned my head slightly, looking at my purse where it sat on the table. Inside it were documents I had not looked at in years. Not because they were unimportant, but because I had never needed to. My husband had handled those things, and I had trusted him. Completely. Tomorrow morning, I was going to open that folder again. Tomorrow, I was going to walk into the bank and ask questions I should have asked a long time ago. Not with anger. Not with desperation. Just with clarity. I closed my eyes, my breathing steady, my body finally beginning to relax into the unfamiliar bed. Outside, a car door slammed somewhere in the distance. Then footsteps. Then quiet again. I did not know exactly what I would find in the morning. I did not know how much had changed while I was not paying attention. But I knew this. Whatever answers were waiting for me, they would not belong to Ashley. They would not belong to anyone sitting at that dinner table. They would be mine. And for the first time since I had walked out of that house, that thought did not feel heavy. It felt steady. It felt like the beginning of something I had not realized I needed until now. I woke up before the alarm I had set the night before, the unfamiliar ceiling above me catching my attention for a brief second before everything settled back into place. The motel room was quiet, the kind of quiet that did not ask anything from you. No footsteps in the hallway I recognized, no soft hum of a coffee maker already brewing in the kitchen downstairs, no familiar presence moving through the house. Just stillness. I sat up slowly, my movements measured, as if rushing would somehow disrupt the clarity I had carried with me from the night before. The digital clock on the bedside table read 6:32, early enough that the day still felt untouched. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and placed my feet on the carpet, noticing how cold it felt compared to the hardwood floors at home. I paused for a moment, my hands resting on my knees, and allowed myself to take one steady breath before standing. In the bathroom, the mirror reflected a version of me that looked exactly the same as yesterday, and yet not entirely familiar. My hair was slightly out of place, my face calm, my eyes steady. There were no signs of distress, no visible cracks. Just a woman who had made a decision without raising her voice. I washed my face, combed my hair, and changed into the same navy blue cardigan I had worn the day before. It still smelled faintly of the house, of laundry detergent I had used for years. I did not linger on that thought. By 7:15, I was back in my car, the morning air crisp, the sky just beginning to lighten with that pale blue that comes before the sun fully rises. The roads were mostly empty, a few early commuters heading into town, their routines already in motion. I merged onto the main road without hesitation, my hands steady on the wheel, my destination clear in a way it had not been the night before. The bank opened at 8. I arrived 10 minutes early and sat in the parking lot, watching as the automatic doors remained closed, the interior lights already on. I had been to this branch countless times over the years, usually with my husband, sometimes alone, always with a sense of familiarity that made it feel like just another part of our routine. Today, it felt different. Not unfamiliar, but newly important. When the doors finally opened, I stepped inside with the same calm I had carried since leaving the house. The air inside was cool, conditioned, carrying that faint scent of paper and polished surfaces. A young teller greeted me with a polite smile, the kind that is practiced but not unkind. "Good morning, ma'am. How can I help you today?" I returned the smile, just slightly, and said, "I would like to review all accounts associated with my name and my late husband's name." The words felt steady as they left my mouth, not heavy, not rushed, just clear. She nodded and asked for my identification, her fingers moving quickly across the keyboard as she pulled up the records. "Of course. Let me take a look at that for you." I handed her my driver's license, watching as she entered the information, her expression neutral, focused. A few seconds passed, then a few more. Her posture shifted just slightly, not enough for most people to notice, but enough for me. She glanced at the screen again, then back at me. "One moment, please," she said, her voice still polite, but now carrying a note of something else. Something more careful. She stood and walked toward one of the offices in the back, speaking quietly to a man in a gray suit. He looked up, glanced in my direction briefly, then nodded and stood, adjusting his jacket before walking toward me. "Mrs. Collins," he said, his tone professional, measured. "I am Daniel Harris, the branch manager. Would you mind stepping into my office for a moment?" I nodded once and followed him, my steps even, my expression unchanged. The office was small but well organized, a desk, 2 chairs, a framed certificate on the wall. He gestured for me to sit, and I did. He closed the door behind us, not abruptly, but with a quiet finality that did not go unnoticed. "I understand you would like to review your accounts," he began, folding his hands on the desk. "Yes," I replied simply. He turned his monitor slightly, so I could see, his finger pointing to the screen. "There are several accounts here, but I want to make sure I explain everything clearly." I leaned forward just enough to look, my eyes scanning the information, the numbers, the names. My name was there, but not where I expected it to be. Not in the places it should have been after more than 40 years of shared finances, shared decisions, shared life. "Can you explain this?" I asked, my voice steady, my finger resting lightly on the edge of the desk. He nodded, choosing his words carefully. "It appears that several of the primary accounts were restructured approximately 18 months ago. 18 months. I let the number settle in my mind. That was before my husband had gotten sick, before the hospital visits, before everything had started to change. Restructured how? I asked. He clicked through a few more screens, the soft tapping of keys the only sound in the room for a moment. Ownership was adjusted. Authorized users were updated. In some cases, names were removed. Removed. The word did not land like a shock. It landed like confirmation. Like a piece of something I had not fully seen finally coming into focus. Whose names? I asked. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, then answered. Your name, Mrs. Collins. I sat back in the chair, my hands resting calmly in my lap, my expression unchanged. Inside, the quiet remained. Not empty, not broken, just clear. I nodded once, slowly, as if acknowledging something that had been waiting to be acknowledged. I see, I said. And in that moment, I understood that what had happened at the dinner table was not sudden. It was simply the first time it had been spoken out loud. I did not ask him to repeat it. I did not ask how it had happened, or who had signed what, or why no one had thought it necessary to tell me. Instead, I sat there in that quiet office, looking at the screen in front of me, and let the information settle into place the way pieces of a puzzle do when you finally stop forcing them and simply see where they belong. 18 months ago, I let that number run through my mind again, slower this time. 18 months ago, my husband had still been strong enough to walk through the house without holding onto the walls. He had still been fixing things in the garage, still insisting on mowing the lawn himself, still telling me not to worry about anything because he had everything under control. I remembered the way he used to say it. Calm, reassuring, certain. I have got it, Margaret. I had believed him. Not because I was naive, but because for more than 40 years, he had never given me a reason not to. Mr. Harris waited quietly across from me, his hands folded, giving me space to think. He did not rush me, did not fill the silence with unnecessary explanations. That, more than anything, told me he understood the weight of what he had just shown me. I leaned forward again slightly, my eyes returning to the screen, tracing the lines of information with a careful attention I had not needed to use in years. Who authorized these changes? I asked, my voice even, my tone free of accusation. Just a question. He clicked once, then again, pulling up a set of documents that appeared in neat rows on the monitor. According to these records, the requests were submitted with proper documentation, he said. Signed and verified. Signed. Verified. Words that should have brought clarity only deepened the stillness inside me. And the signatures? I asked. They belong to my husband. Mr. Harris hesitated just enough for the answer to form before he spoke it. Yes, ma'am. They appear to. Appear to. I noticed the phrasing. Careful. Professional. Not absolute. I nodded once, slowly, as if acknowledging a detail that mattered but did not yet define the whole picture. My husband had always been meticulous with paperwork. He read everything. Every line, every clause, every number. He did not sign anything without understanding it first. That was who he was. That was who he had always been. So either he had known exactly what he was signing, or someone had made sure he believed he did. I sat back again, my hands returning to my lap, my posture relaxed in a way that felt almost deliberate. Are there any accounts where my name remains as primary? I asked. Mr. Harris clicked through another set of screens, his expression focused. There are a few smaller accounts, he said. Savings, a personal checking account. But the primary assets, the larger balances, they were all restructured. I let out a quiet breath, not a sigh, just an acknowledgement of what was in front of me. Smaller accounts. The kind you keep for convenience. Not the kind that hold a lifetime of work. Not the kind that determine whether someone has a home or not. I stood up then, not abruptly, but with a calm that surprised even me. I would like copies of all these records, I said. Everything related to these changes. Mr. Harris nodded immediately. Of course. I can have those printed for you right away. He stood as well, moving to the printer in the corner of the office. The machine hummed softly as it began to produce page after page, each sheet sliding out with a quiet certainty that felt almost deliberate. I watched them stack neatly in the tray, each one a piece of something that had been happening while I was not looking, while I was trusting, while I was grieving. When he handed them to me, I took them carefully, aligning the edges with a small, precise motion before placing them into my purse. Thank you, I said, meeting his eyes for the first time since the conversation began. He nodded, his expression respectful, understanding without being intrusive. If you need anything further, Please do not hesitate to reach out, he said. I gave a small nod in return and turned toward the door, my steps steady as I walked out of the office and back into the main area of the bank. The same teller looked up as I passed, offering a polite smile that I returned without slowing. Outside, the morning had fully arrived. The sun was higher now, the light brighter, the air carrying that familiar crispness that comes with early fall. I paused for just a moment at the top of the steps, the papers in my bag feeling heavier than they should have been, not because of their weight, but because of what they represented. 18 months of decisions. 18 months of changes. 18 months of something happening quietly in the background while I believed everything was exactly as it had always been. I walked to my car and opened the door, placing my purse carefully on the passenger seat before sitting down. I did not start the engine right away. Instead, I reached into the bag and pulled out the stack of papers, resting them on my lap. The top page was dated clearly. 18 months ago. I traced the date with my finger, then turned the page, then another, each document revealing the same pattern, the same quiet shift from what had been ours to something that no longer included me. My eyes moved over the signatures, the names, the details that now mattered in a way they never had before. And then, on one of the pages, I saw something that made my hand pause for just a second longer than the rest. A second signature. Not my husband's. Not mine. Ashley Collins. I did not react. I did not gasp or frown or let the moment show on my face. I simply looked at it, let it settle, let it take its place among everything else I had just learned. Then I placed the papers back into my purse, closed it carefully, and rested my hands on the steering wheel. The quiet inside me remained, but it was different now. Not just clear, focused, because now I knew. Something I had not known when I walked out of that house. This had not started with a sentence at a dinner table. It had started long before that. And my daughter had not just spoken those words. She had been preparing for them. I did not drive away immediately after seeing her name on that document. Instead, I sat there in the parking lot with the engine off, the quiet inside the car wrapping around me in a way that felt almost intentional. Ashley Collins. My daughter. Not just present in the situation, not just aware, but involved. Signed. Authorized. Participating in something that had been unfolding long before she ever told me to leave. I rested my hands loosely on the steering wheel and let the memory begin to surface. Not forced, not rushed, but steady. 18 months ago. That was around the time Ashley had started coming by more often. At first, I had been grateful. She would stop in during the afternoons, sometimes with coffee, sometimes with groceries I had not asked for, but appreciated anyway. She would sit with her father in the living room, asking him questions in a tone that sounded caring, attentive. Do you want me to help organize some of the paperwork? She had asked one afternoon, standing near his recliner with a folder in her hand. He had looked at her, then at me, and smiled in that calm way he always did. Your mother and I have always handled it just fine, he said. I remembered that moment clearly now, the way she had laughed softly, not pushing, not insisting, just planting the idea gently into the room. I know, Dad. I just thought I could make things easier for you both. Easier. I repeated the words silently as I sat in the car. It had sounded harmless at the time. Thoughtful, even. But now it settled differently. I started the engine slowly, the sound grounding me as I pulled out of the parking lot and onto the main road. I did not have a specific destination in mind yet, but I knew I was not going back to the motel just yet. I needed to think, and movement had always helped me do that. The road stretched ahead, lined with trees just beginning to turn, their leaves shifting from green to shades of gold and red. It was a season of change, one I had always found beautiful. Now it felt more precise. I drove for a while without noticing the exact turns I was taking, my mind moving through moments that had once felt ordinary, but now carried weight. Ashley standing at the kitchen counter, flipping through a stack of mail that used to go unopened until I sorted it myself. Ashley sitting at the dining table with my husband, papers spread out in front of them, her voice soft, patient. It is just a formality, Dad. It will make things simpler later. Simpler. Another word that had seemed harmless. Another word that now felt carefully placed. I slowed at a red light, my fingers resting lightly on the wheel as the signal counted down. I could see it clearly now, not as separate moments, but as a pattern. Small steps. Quiet shifts. Nothing loud enough to alarm me at the time. Nothing obvious enough to question. Until it was too late. The light turned green, and I continued forward, my movements automatic, my thoughts anything but. I remembered the day my husband had asked me to bring him his reading glasses from the bedroom. He had been sitting at the dining table with Ashley, a document in front of him. "Just need to take a look at something," he had said, his tone casual. I had handed him the glasses without thinking twice. That was who we were. We trusted each other. We did not question every detail. We did not look for hidden intentions in ordinary requests. That was not the kind of life we had built. Or at least, that was what I had believed. I turned into a quiet street without realizing it at first, a neighborhood I recognized from years of running errands, picking up groceries, living a life that had once been predictable in the best way. I pulled over near a small park and turned off the engine again. The trees there were taller, older, their branches stretching out in a way that made the space feel calm, contained. I sat there, looking out through the windshield, the sunlight filtering through the leaves in soft patterns. My reflection faintly visible against it. I reached into my purse and pulled out the papers again, flipping through them slowly this time, not searching for something new, but confirming what I already understood. Dates, signatures, adjustments, and her name, appearing more than once, not just a single involvement, but a repeated presence. This had not been a moment of pressure or a single decision made in haste. This had been a process, a plan. I placed the papers back into my bag and closed it carefully, aligning the zipper with a small, precise motion. My hands were steady, my breathing even. Inside, the quiet had shifted again. It was no longer just clarity. It was recognition. Because I could see it now, fully, without hesitation. My daughter had not just stood at that table and spoken those words out of frustration or grief. She had been moving toward that moment for over a year. Step by step, paper by paper, signature by signature. I leaned back slightly in the seat, my eyes still on the trees ahead of me, and for the first time since I had walked out of that house, a different thought settled in. Not a question, not confusion, something else. If she had been planning this for 18 months, then she believed she had already won. And that meant she was not expecting me to ask anything. Not at the bank. Not anywhere. I rested my hands back on the steering wheel and started the engine again, the decision forming quietly, without urgency, without doubt. I was not going to call her. I was not going to confront her. Not yet. Because there was still more I needed to understand. And something told me that the answers were not going to come from what she said. They were going to come from what she had already done. I did not return to the motel right away. Instead, I drove slowly through streets I had known for decades, past houses that looked familiar but somehow distant now, as if they belonged to a version of my life that no longer included me. My hands stayed steady on the wheel, my posture unchanged, but inside, something had begun to shift into place with a quiet precision. If Ashley had been involved in this for 18 months, then she had not acted alone. She did not understand financial documents well enough to restructure accounts, to move ownership, to remove names without guidance. That was not something she could have done by herself, no matter how determined she had been. I turned onto Maple Avenue without thinking, a street lined with older homes and small offices, the kind that did not draw attention but had been part of the town for years. Halfway down the block, I slowed. The sign was still there, just as it had always been. Whitman & Cole Legal Services. The lettering was slightly faded, the building modest, but I recognized it immediately. My husband had worked with Thomas Whitman for years. Not just for business matters, but for everything. Contracts, property documents, long-term planning. Things I had trusted him to handle, the same way I had trusted my husband to take care of them. I pulled into the small parking lot and turned off the engine, my gaze resting on the front door. The glass reflected the street behind me, not revealing what was inside. I sat there for a moment, not hesitating, just allowing the next step to settle into place. Then I reached for my purse, stepped out of the car, and walked toward the entrance. The bell above the door chimed softly as I pushed it open, the sound familiar in a way that made something tighten briefly in my chest before settling again. The office looked exactly as I remembered. Dark wood furniture, shelves lined with neatly organized binders, a faint scent of paper and polish that had not changed in years. A woman at the front desk looked up, her expression polite, professional. "Good morning. How can I help you?" she asked. "I would like to speak with Mr. Whitman," I said, my voice calm measured. She hesitated slightly, then offered a small, apologetic smile. "Mr. Whitman retired last year," she said. But his partner, Daniel Cole, is still here. Would you like me to see if he is available? Retired. I nodded once. Yes, please. She picked up the phone, speaking quietly for a moment before setting it down again. He can see you now, she said, gesturing toward a hallway to the right. I walked down the hallway, my steps even, my attention focused. The door at the end was slightly open. I knocked once lightly. Come in, a voice called. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. Daniel Cole stood behind his desk, a man in his late 50s, his expression attentive but reserved. Mrs. Collins, he said, recognition flickering in his eyes as he stepped forward. I am very sorry for your loss. I inclined my head slightly. Thank you. He gestured toward the chair in front of his desk. Please have a seat. I sat down, placing my purse carefully beside me, my hands resting lightly in my lap. He returned to his chair, studying me for a brief moment before speaking again. What can I help you with today? I reached into my purse and removed the stack of documents from the bank, placing them on his desk with a quiet, deliberate motion. I need to understand these, I said. He glanced down at the papers, his expression shifting almost imperceptibly as he began to flip through them. His movement slowed slightly as he reached certain pages, his eyes narrowing just enough to suggest recognition. He did not speak immediately. He continued reading, turning page after page, the silence in the room stretching just long enough to confirm what I had already begun to suspect. When he finally looked up, his expression had changed. Not dramatically, but enough. More careful, more aware. Where did you get these? He asked. From the bank this morning, I replied. He nodded slowly, his fingers resting on the edge of the top document. And you were not aware of these changes? No, I said simply. He leaned back slightly in his chair, exhaling in a way that suggested he was choosing his next words with precision. Mrs. Collins, he began, his tone measured. Some of these documents appear to have been processed through our office. I held his gaze, my expression unchanged. Processed, I repeated quietly. He nodded once. Yes. I did not interrupt. I did not rush him. I let the silence remain until he continued. However, he added, his voice more deliberate now, I want to be very clear. There are procedures we follow, verifications, consultations, and I do not recall meeting with you regarding these changes. I inclined my head slightly. You would have remembered, I said. It was not a question. He gave a small nod. Yes, I would have. I reached forward then, turning one of the documents so it faced him more directly, my finger resting lightly near the bottom of the page. Then perhaps you can explain how my name was removed without that meeting. The room grew quieter, the weight of the question settling between us without the need for raised voices or sharp tones. Daniel Cole looked down at the document again, his expression tightening just enough to show that whatever answer he had, it was not a simple one. And in that moment, sitting across from him in that familiar office, I understood something with complete clarity. The papers in my bag were only the beginning. Because if these changes had passed through this office, then someone had made sure they looked legitimate. Someone had made sure they would not be questioned. And that meant there was still more I had not seen yet. Daniel Cole did not answer immediately. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, his fingers pressing together as if holding the shape of something he was not ready to say out loud just yet. His eyes moved from the document back to me, measuring, careful. There are instances, he began slowly, where documents can be processed with power of attorney, provided the proper authorization is in place. Power of attorney. The phrase settled into the space between us with a quiet weight. I did not react. I did not lean back or forward. I simply looked at him, letting him continue. If your husband granted that authority to someone, he added, that individual would have been able to act on his behalf in certain financial and legal matters. I nodded once slowly. And would that require my consent? I asked. His pause this time was shorter, but more precise. Not necessarily, he said. Not necessarily. I let the words settle without interruption. My husband had always been careful, deliberate. He did not hand over control easily, not to anyone, not even to me, not out of distrust, but out of habit. He believed in understanding every detail himself. So if a power of attorney had been signed, it had not been done casually. It had been introduced, explained, justified. I could see it now, not as a guess, but as a sequence. Ashley sitting beside him, her voice calm, patient, reassuring. It is just in case, Dad. It will make things easier if anything happens. Easier. Always easier. I shifted slightly in my seat, my hand still resting neatly in my lap. Who would have been granted that authority? I asked. Daniel Cole looked down at the document again, then reached for a folder on his desk, opening it with a quiet, deliberate motion. He flipped through several pages before stopping, his eyes scanning the contents. When he spoke again, his tone had changed. More formal, more precise. According to our records, he said, a limited power of attorney was established approximately 19 months ago. 19. Even earlier than the financial changes. And the designated agent? I asked. He looked up at me then, holding my gaze for just a fraction longer than necessary before answering. Ashley Collins. I did not move. I did not shift in my chair or change my expression. I simply acknowledged the information the same way I had acknowledged everything else that morning. Calmly. Completely. I see, I said. He closed the folder slowly, his hands resting on top of it, as if it now carried more weight than before. Mrs. Collins, he continued, a limited power of attorney does not grant unlimited control. There are boundaries, specific permissions. It would depend on how it was structured. Then I would like to see that document, I said. There was no hesitation in my voice, no uncertainty, just a clear request. He nodded once. Of course. He stood and walked to a filing cabinet along the wall, unlocking it with a small key he retrieved from his pocket. The sound of the drawer sliding open was soft, almost routine, but it carried a sense of finality that did not go unnoticed. He searched through the files carefully before pulling out a folder and returning to his desk. He placed it in front of me and opened it, turning it so I could see. This is the document, he said. I leaned forward slightly, my eyes moving over the page with a steady focus. The text was formal, structured, filled with the kind of language that is meant to clarify, but often hides as much as it reveals. I read it line by line, not rushing, not skipping ahead. My husband's name, the date, the designation of authority, and then the limitations. Specific, defined, controlled, not a blanket permission, not an open door, a narrow path, carefully outlined. My eyes moved to the signature at the bottom. His signature. Familiar. Consistent. But something about it made me pause, not because it was obviously wrong, but because it felt lighter, less certain than I remembered. I did not comment on it. Not yet. Instead, I turned my attention to the section outlining what Ashley was permitted to do. Administrative tasks. Assistance with financial organization. Limited authority over specific accounts. Not ownership changes. Not removal of primary names. I sat back slowly, my hands returning to my lap as I let the meaning settle into place. This does not authorize what was done, I said quietly. Daniel Cole did not respond immediately. He did not argue. He did not correct me. He simply nodded once. No, he said. The word was soft, but it carried more weight than anything else he had said so far. The room felt still again, but this time the stillness was different. It was no longer about understanding what had happened. It was about recognizing what had gone beyond what was allowed. I reached forward and closed the folder gently, aligning it with the edge of the desk before looking back at him. I would like copies of this as well, I said, and any other documents related to this authorization. He nodded again, already reaching for the necessary forms. I will have everything prepared for you, he said. As he stood to gather the copies, I remained seated, my posture unchanged, my mind clear in a way that felt almost precise. Because now I understood something that had not been fully clear before. This had not just been planned. It had been executed carefully, step by step, within a structure that was meant to appear legitimate. But somewhere along the way, that structure had been stretched beyond its limits. And that meant something very simple. Someone had crossed a line they were not supposed to cross. I stood when he returned with the documents, taking them with the same quiet care I had shown at the bank. Thank you, I said. He inclined his head slightly. If you need further assistance, he began, but I did not need him to finish the sentence. I nodded once and turned toward the door, my steps steady as I walked out of the office and back into the hallway. The bell chimed softly again as I stepped outside, the sunlight brighter now, the air warmer than it had been that morning. I paused for just a moment at the edge of the parking lot, the folder in my hand, the pieces of the situation finally aligning into something complete. Not just a plan, not just a betrayal, a mistake. And the moment I recognized that, I knew something else with absolute certainty. They believed everything had already been taken care of. They believed there was nothing left for me to question. They believed I would accept what I had been told and quietly disappear from the life I had built. I placed the documents carefully into my purse and walked toward my car, my movements calm, deliberate. Because now, for the first time since this began, I was not just observing what had been done. I was deciding what I was going to do next. I did not go back to the motel after leaving the office. Instead, I drove with a sense of direction that had not been there before, not because I suddenly knew everything, but because I now understood enough. Enough to stop reacting. Enough to start choosing. The road back toward the house felt different this time. Not heavier, not lighter, just clearer. I knew they would not expect me to return so soon. They would assume I needed time. That I was somewhere trying to figure out what to do next. That I was confused. That assumption worked in my favor. I pulled into the neighborhood just after noon, the streets quiet in that midday way when most people are at work and the world feels paused. The house came into view exactly as it had the night before. Same driveway, same porch, same windows reflecting the sky like nothing had changed. I parked on the street instead of the driveway, not out of hesitation, but out of habit I had not yet decided to break. For a moment, I sat in the car with the engine off, my hands resting on the steering wheel, my eyes on the front door. I was not thinking about what to say. I was not rehearsing anything. I was simply observing. The front curtains were slightly drawn. The mailbox was still closed. Everything appeared normal. I stepped out of the car and walked toward the house at the same steady pace I had always used, my posture straight, my movements calm. When I reached the door, I did not knock. I used my key. The lock turned easily, the sound familiar, unchanged. Inside, the air carried the same faint scent of coffee and furniture polish, a combination that had once meant comfort. Now, it was just a detail. Ashley was in the kitchen, standing at the counter with her phone in hand. She looked up when she heard the door, her expression shifting for just a fraction of a second before settling into something controlled. "You came back," she said, her tone neutral, not surprised, not welcoming. I placed my purse on the chair near the door, removing my coat slowly, as if I had just returned from an ordinary errand. "I needed to pick up a few things," I replied. My voice was even, my tone measured, nothing in it suggesting what I had learned that morning. She watched me for a moment, her eyes searching for something, perhaps an argument, perhaps a reaction she could manage. When she did not find it, she turned back to her phone. "I thought you might need more time," she said, almost casually. "I will be out of your way soon," I answered, moving toward the hallway. I did not look at her again as I walked past the kitchen, past the dining room, past the chair that still sat empty at the head of the table. I did not slow down. I did not pause. I went straight upstairs. The bedroom door was exactly where I had left it, slightly open, the light from the window stretching across the floor in a quiet, familiar pattern. I stepped inside and closed the door gently behind me. The room felt unchanged, but I was not. I walked to the dresser and opened the top drawer, my movements precise as I began selecting a few items. Not everything, just enough. A folder from the back of the drawer caught my attention, one I had not opened in years. I pulled it out and placed it on the bed, opening it slowly. Inside were older documents, copies of earlier agreements, notes written in my husband's careful handwriting. I flipped through them with a steady focus, comparing dates, names, details with what I had seen at the bank and the office. The pattern became clearer with each page. What had once been balanced had been shifted. What had once been shared had been redirected. I closed the folder and placed it carefully into my bag, alongside the documents I had collected that morning. Then I moved to the closet, selecting a few pieces of clothing, folding them neatly, placing them into a small suitcase I had kept. At the back, I did not rush. I did not hesitate. Each action was deliberate, controlled. Downstairs, I could hear faint movement, the sound of a cabinet closing, footsteps crossing the kitchen floor. Life continuing as if nothing had changed. I zipped the suitcase and stood for a moment in the center of the room, my eyes moving slowly across the space. This had been my room, my life, my years. And yet, everything that mattered now was no longer here. It was in the documents in my bag, in the details I had uncovered, in the understanding I now carried with me. I picked up the suitcase and walked back downstairs, my steps steady, my expression unchanged. Ashley looked up again as I entered the kitchen, her eyes moving from the suitcase to my face. That was fast, she said, a slight edge to her voice now, something sharper beneath the calm. I placed the suitcase by the door and reached for my purse, lifting it onto my shoulder. I only needed a few things, I replied. She crossed her arms, leaning slightly against the counter. Where are you going? She asked. I met her eyes then, not with anger, not with accusation, but with a calm she had not expected. I will let you know when it matters, I said. The words were simple, but they settled into the room with a weight that shifted something in her expression. Just slightly. Just enough. I turned toward the door, my hand resting on the handle for a brief moment before opening it. The sunlight outside was brighter now, the air warmer. I stepped out without looking back, the door closing quietly behind me. I placed the suitcase in the back seat, set my purse beside it, and got into the car. As I started the engine, I caught a glimpse of the house in the mirror, unchanged, still, waiting. But this time, I did not linger on it. Because I knew something they did not. This was not the end of anything. This was the part they believed was already finished. And that belief was about to become their biggest mistake. I did not drive far this time either, but unlike the night before, I knew exactly where I was going. Not to the motel, not to wander, not to sit in silence and piece things together. That part was over. By the time I pulled into the parking lot of Whitman and Cole again, the afternoon sun had shifted just enough to cast longer shadows across the pavement, the kind that stretched quietly without asking for attention. I stepped out of the car with the same steady pace, my suitcase still in the back seat, my purse resting firmly on my shoulder. Inside, the office looked unchanged from earlier, but this time, I did not wait at the front desk. The receptionist looked up, slightly surprised, but I simply said, "I need to see Mr. Cole again," and she nodded without question. When I entered his office, Daniel Cole stood immediately, a flicker of recognition crossing his face. "Mrs. Collins," he said, his tone more alert this time. "Is everything all right?" I closed the door behind me gently and placed my purse on the chair before sitting down. "I believe there is more you need to show me," I said. There was no hesitation in my voice, no uncertainty left. He studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly, as if understanding that whatever had brought me back was not something that could be dismissed or delayed. "There may be," he replied carefully. "What specifically are you looking for?" I reached into my purse and pulled out the older folder I had taken from my dresser, placing it beside the documents from the bank and his office. "The original structure," I said, "before any of these changes were made." He glanced at the papers, then at me, and something in his expression shifted again, more serious now, more precise. Without another word, he turned to his filing cabinet, unlocking it once more and retrieving a different set of documents. When he returned, he placed them in front of me and opened them, turning the pages so I could see clearly. "These are the original estate and asset documents," he said, "filed several years ago." I leaned forward slightly, my eyes moving over the familiar names, the dates, the structure that had once defined everything my husband and I had built together. Joint ownership, shared authority, clear, balanced, intentional. I turned the page slowly, then another, my fingers steady, my attention sharp. And then I saw it. A clause I had not thought about in years. One that had been explained to me once, briefly, before being filed. A way with everything else we trusted would remain as it was. I paused, my eyes resting on the words, reading them again, more carefully this time. "What is this?" I asked, though I already understood enough to know it mattered. Daniel Cole leaned slightly closer, following my gaze. "That is a protective clause," he said. "Your husband included it to ensure that any unauthorized or improper transfer of primary assets could be contested and reversed." I did not react outwardly, but something inside me aligned completely in that moment. "Unauthorized," I repeated quietly. He nodded once. "Yes. If actions were taken outside the scope of the agreed authority, they can be legally challenged." I sat back slowly, the pieces fitting together with a clarity that left no room for doubt. The power of attorney had limits. The changes had exceeded those limits. And my husband, careful as he had always been, had already accounted for the possibility that someone might try. I closed the folder gently, my hand resting on top of it for just a moment before lifting my eyes to meet his. "Then I would like to proceed with that challenge," I said. There was no hesitation, no question, just a decision. Daniel Cole studied me for a moment, then gave a small, deliberate nod. We can begin that process immediately, he said. It will require formal filings, documentation, and a review of all transactions made under that authority. You have everything you need, I replied, gesturing lightly to the documents spread across his desk. He followed my gesture, then looked back at me. Yes, he said. I believe we do. The room felt still again, but this time, the stillness carried something different. Not uncertainty, not confusion, direction. I stood, gathering the documents carefully, aligning them as I placed them back into my purse. There is one more thing, I added, pausing just before turning away. He waited, attentive. I do not want them informed until it is necessary, I said. I would prefer they remain exactly as they are, believing everything is settled. A faint understanding crossed his expression, followed by a small nod. That can be arranged, he said. Then we will proceed quietly, I replied. I turned and walked out of the office, my steps steady, my posture unchanged. Outside, the air felt different than it had that morning. Not because the weather had changed, but because I had. I reached my car and placed my purse on the passenger seat before getting in, my hands resting on the steering wheel for just a moment before starting the engine. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I did not look back. There was nothing behind me that needed my attention anymore. Everything that mattered was already in motion. They believed I had left with nothing, that I had accepted their version of events, their decisions, their control. They believed the house was theirs. The accounts were theirs. The future was already theirs. I drove forward without hesitation, the road ahead clear in a way it had not been before. Because now, for the first time since this began, I was not reacting to what had been done to me. I was responding to what I knew. And what I knew was simple. I had not lost anything. They had just revealed everything.